Hello, gentlemen, and welcome to the Men Save Your Marriage show. My name is Terry. I'm your host. I did an autopsy on my failed marriage, and now I use the lessons that I learned to coach other men on how to save their marriage before it fails. I'm going to share with you the things I wish someone would have shared with me before my marriage failed. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hello, gentlemen, and welcome back. You heard the bell. It is time to get in the ring, and it's time for the fight of your life as you fight for your marriage or you fight to save your marriage. Welcome back. My name is Terry. I'm your host, and this is the Men Save Your Marriage podcast or show. And today we're in episode number 13, and I'm going to take just a few minutes, and we're going to talk about the importance of sex and how to reconnect or connect more intimately. This is something that I see, something that I lived, something that I experienced, and something that I see every day as I communicate with men who are in the fight to try to save their marriage. This is one of the probably the most prominent indicators, as we're going to dig into this in just a moment, of where a relationship is or has been and maybe where it's headed. So the premise for this one is it's significant. I mean, sex is it's a key part of marriage, but very often, almost always, it declines in a troubled relationship. So we're going to discuss very quickly the emotional and physical aspects of this sexual connection, how to talk about it openly with your spouse, with your wife, and how to reignite passion. Now, I want to say at the offset, there are times in a marriage over the years that as you progress through it, there's going to be seasons where maybe there is less intimacy. I can remember vividly a stretch of years in my marriage where I was trying to climb the corporate ladder. We're trying to raise small children. You most probably understand what I'm talking about. And it just seems like there's a season there where it's very, very difficult to connect as often as we'd like or as regularly as we'd like, whatever the case may be. But then I've come through that season, and then you get to a season where things kind of slow down, where you can reconnect. I'm not necessarily talking about those instances, because those instances are just they're just the vicissitudes. I mean, that's just the waves and the flow of life, and those are going to happen. And, but I'm talking about long-term, over time. If you're in a troubled marriage, we're going to talk about, and you're fighting to save your marriage, we're going to talk about the intimacy. So let's dig into this. I'm sure if you've been in a troubled marriage at all, or if you're in one now, you understand what it maybe feels like to be laying next to your wife every night, and yet you feel miles apart. I hear it all the time with the men that I coach, how it is, Terry, we're roommates. That's all we are, right? And that is such a common theme in dealing with, and working through a struggling marriage. And so we got to talk about this, because you're lying next to her and yet you feel like you are a whole nother world apart. And I got to ask, have you found that your conversations have become almost superficial? We just talk about the bare necessities, what we need to. We don't have deep conversations. We don't have conversations about how we feel about different things or about where we're at emotionally, right? This is some of the indicators that you can see in your own marriage where you realize things may not be in a good place. Physical touch fades into memory, right? In my marriage, when things were good, even in those busy times I talked about just a moment ago, I don't ever remember walking through the kitchen. And I think if I walked through the kitchen and I didn't smack her bottom or touch her, then there was an issue. But then over the years, as things fell apart and my marriage began to fade, I never touched her, right? So we need to talk about this, and you need to make sure you're taking a look at these things in your marriage and in your life. That physical touch, like I said, it just fades. And quite honestly, this is the reality of a lot of couples that are trapped, as it were, in a sexless marriage. And you will, if you've reached a place, or if you were to get to a place to where the sex is completely gone and it's just not even something we're doing anymore at all, and there is no intimacy, you will begin to feel trapped. It's going to happen. So we need to discuss this. You need to be aware of it. You need to think this through for yourself. And then as you begin to rebuild or to work to save your marriage, this is going to have to be something that you have a conversation, probably multiple conversations with. Because the lack of marital intimacy creates this deep emotional void and this disconnection. And I firmly believe that you're only going to go so far in saving or rebuilding a marriage until that deep connection is reestablished. So let's talk about, as always, I come at you with just 3 tips, three ideas, and we'll dig into those briefly, and then we'll be done for this episode. The first one: why do sexless relationships happen? And there's just a few of the very common, actually 3 of the very common or most common reasons. Okay. One, health issues. One spouse or another is maybe dealing with some health things, right? That's a very common one. And that's one where that doesn't necessarily mean the marriage is falling apart. That just means one of the partners is dealing with some stuff. So if you're in that situation, that's a little bit different in context to what I'm talking about with this episode. But you need to still be aware of that. So that's the first one. Then the second one, most common, is emotional disconnection. And this one may be where some of you are at. I know it's where I was for a long time. And that's because our marriage had gotten so far apart, there was no emotional connection. We were completely as disconnected again. It was we're roommates. That's all we are, right? That's probably the one that most applies to what we're talking about in the context of trying to save a marriage and fight for a marriage. So probably that emotional disconnection is the most common one. And knowing that, when this episode's over, you're going to have to do some long, hard thinking about how I reconnect with her emotionally. And that's not really something that I can guide you on from here because I don't know her. So that's something that I'll take on when I'm coaching one man individually, one-on-one, because then I can dig in and ask him questions. But you're going to have to evaluate where you are emotionally, between you and her, and then how you can reconnect emotionally so that it can lead to reconnecting physically. And then the other common one is past traumas or unresolved conflicts. There can't be a deep emotional connection to where you can each give your physical being to the other without resolving whatever the tensions may be between you. But also you have to be aware of, are there any past traumas? I have one gentleman that I'm working with now. His wife was... she was raped long before he met her, and that is baggage that she had to work through and she carries. But there have been times as their marriage was struggling, that past trauma came up, and it just became easier for her to disconnect. So they are working through that to try to reestablish or to continue to establish the connection that they have, and part of that is working through that trauma that she experienced. So those are just a few of the more common reasons that the sexless relationship can happen. Okay. Now the second thing I want to get into is here's some just a few ideas and a few tips for reigniting passion in the bedroom, because you're dealing with 2 people that were once together. This is more often the case, and the guys that I'm talking to here, 2 people that were once together. They were very passionate. They were crazy in love with each other, but things have happened, life has happened, and now you 2 are not as connected, or your marriage isn't as strong as it was, or wherever status you're in right now, and you're trying to fight for that marriage and reconnect, and you need to reignite that passion. So I'm going to give you a list here real quick of these items, but I would suggest everything in this list can be wrapped up with just this one sentence. You need to court her again. just like you did when you first got together. And I don't care if you are 30 and been married for 5 years and your marriage is in trouble. I don't care if you're 60 and been married for 40 years and your marriage is in trouble. You need to court her and date her just like you did when you first met her. That's one of the ways you're going to be able to show her how much she means to you. So that's the big one. That's the big talking point here for reigniting that passion. Chase after her. She wants to be chased after. She enjoyed when you chased after her when you first met. But here's a few ideas. Change the pattern of initiating sex. If you're still in a relationship where there is intimacy, maybe find a new way or a different way to initiate it. This one's going to sound crazy, but hold hands more often. I was reading a psychologist talked about this, because by holding hands or hugging, that the act of that can release oxytocin. And I don't mean in a sexual way, just holding hands or just hugging her in a completely non-sexual way can still release oxytocin within her and within you that causes you two to be drawn together. Okay? If I were you, I would separate your intimacy from routine. So, it's not, the kids are in bed or the kids are gone or whatever this or whatever that, however you have done it in the past, whatever kind of flow and routine you've had to build up to and to get to intimacy, change it a little bit and make sure you separate intimacy from the day-to-day routine. Make sure it's separate. Carve out time to spend with her. And I don't mean spend with her in the bed or in the bedroom. I mean just to spend with her. Go get coffee and just spend an hour talking about all kinds of things. Connect with her. Okay? Focus on affection and touch, right? Again, going back to holding hands or hugging. Maintain a sense of curiosity. I would, if I'm really going to try and we're going to reconnect and reignite the passion between us, I'm going to ask questions about, what do you enjoy the most when we have been together, and what would you like? You get into all of it between you and her, and make sex a priority. If you are still in a situation, in a relationship where there is intimacy, make it a priority. But make sure you're connecting with her emotionally. You're connecting with her physically by holding hands, by hugging. You're expressing yourself to her. And these are ways that you can begin to strengthen that emotional connection between you two that can reignite the passion in the bedroom. And then the last area I want to talk about here is kind of how an emotional connection can lead to kind of better physical intimacy. And this is kind of a list. I want you to listen carefully and go through this in your mind in your marriage. And you need to think back, am I seeing this develop? Because this list is kind of going to be kind of like your status update on whether or not, things maybe are falling apart. See, what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to walk through this blindly without realizing, something's wrong. Okay? So I'm going to ask you some questions. Are you distancing yourself from her? Do you feel lonely? Are you less affectionate? Okay? Those are important, because if you feel lonely in your own home where your spouse is with you, then there's a disconnection there. Do you feel less affectionate for her? Are you having less sex? Okay, that's just straight up. Is the frequency, and again, we talked about earlier, there are certain instances, whether they be health related or, maybe there's some emotional, some trauma, some past stuff. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about just the what we would call the regular intimacy of marriage. Are you having less sex than you used to? And if you are, the first thing you need to ask yourself, is there something that's changed in our lives that's causing that? Are you in one of those seasons to where one of you is really hyper-focused on something else and it's kind of distracting from the marriage or the relationship? And if that's not the case, but you are not as intimate or as active as you used to be, then you got to start asking yourself why. Okay? Do you find yourself times where you don't know what to say to her? Have you lost empathy? Or are you arguing more? All these are indicators about the emotional connection that can tell you and teach you about the physical connection. Are you walking on eggshells? Do you ever feel like you're walking on eggshells around her? You just can't say anything right. You can't do anything. And you just feel like you just can't, nothing works between you, right? Are you in a place where you don't really support each other emotionally, or you're not the champion in her corner kind of thing? All of this can lead to a few different things. Obviously, it can lead to that emotional disconnection, which is going to lead to a physical disconnection. And finally, if this goes on long enough, I can tell you from experience, you're going to question whether or not you're in the right relationship. And you're going to look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, very much like you would the reason you're listening to this podcast, is my marriage dead? And these are things that you need to be thinking through. These are things that you need to be thinking about, because if you're here, like I hope you are, to fight for your marriage, and if you're here to try to save your marriage, then this is where it really comes down to just absolutely brass tacks and the minute details. Because above everything else, you and her have to have an emotional and physical connection. Otherwise, it's not a marriage. It may be a marriage on paper, but it's not a functioning marriage and a healthy marriage. So you have to ask yourself some of these questions. And if you drill down into some of these questions that I just asked you, and you find yourself, you're asking yourself if you're in the right relationship, then you've got to, if you're down to that point, you've got to really ask yourself, do I want to fight for this? Am I ready to fight for this? I can promise you it's going to be a fight. It is absolutely going to be a fight. And you've got to fight yourself all the way back to an emotional connection and then a physical connection between the two of you, so you can regain that intimacy and that connection between you. That's how the marriage will survive. And if you're to a place where you're asking yourself, am I in the right relationship? Then you may be far enough down along the road that you need to think about this carefully and decide, yes, I'm going to fight for this. And I don't know if you remember way back in episode 1 or maybe episode 2, I talked about some of these statistics, okay? For everybody that gets a divorce, 73% of us guys are going to remarry and have a second marriage. But the second marriage, so 73% of us are going to remarry, and of the 73% that remarry, I believe it was, if I recall correctly, it was like 75% are going to get are going to get a second divorce. So your best shot at having a long, healthy marriage is to fight for the one you got. Because leaving this one and somewhere down the road getting and having another one is not the best option. The numbers bear it out. You are better off fighting for what you've got. So I hope that's a little bit of encouragement for you to fight for your marriage. I really want you to. But you need to answer these questions. You need to have a real heart-to-heart with yourself and make sure you're fully aware, okay, we don't have sex like we used to, or we're not having sex at all. Then I've got to figure out how to build that emotional connection. And you've got to build that first before you ever have a chance of a physical connection. So then you're going to have to begin to ask yourself, how do I rebuild this emotional connection? Knowing her the way you do, the way you have in the past, you're going to have to figure out. And I would suggest, one, that you're willing to talk about this. And I know sometimes it's uncomfortable to talk about, but you got to be willing to talk about this with her. Don't be afraid to seek some counseling or some coaching. I coach guys every day. That's what I do, is I coach men in their marriages. So, but don't be afraid to search out a coach. Don't be afraid to seek out some counseling if need be, if that's where you're at. And then ask yourself these questions and think through these issues. Are we just roommates? Is that how we feel? Are we in a completely sexless relationship? And can I change the patterns of the way we connect? Can I connect with her on an emotional level so that we can reconnect on a physical level? These are some of the things we have to think through, men, especially if we not only want to save our marriage, but we want to lead in our marriage. And if she's still in it, if she's still trying to connect with you, then she's still in it for the fight, then connect with her. Connect with her emotionally, then you can connect with her physically. And this is how you can reconnect on such an intimate level, and it will strengthen not only the importance of the sex in the marriage, but it'll strengthen the marriage altogether. I hope this has helped, guys. Ask yourself these questions. Think these things through for yourself and for your marriage. I look forward to seeing you next time. Please do me a favor, wherever you get the show at, wherever you download it from or listen to it from, please do me a favor and like and subscribe. Give me a rating. If you feel so inclined, I'd love a 5-star review with a comment. I read every comment. So thank you for your time, guys, and I will see you on the next episode. You all have a great day.